Hey everyone, Dr. Aeronautics here. Today we're going to be going over automatic reentry, autopilot in the DeltaGlider IV. So remember I said earlier that reentry was a pretty big, significant event. So the idea is you're in orbit, you're traveling almost 8 kilometers per second, and now you decide that you want to land at Cape Canaveral. So there are two ways to do this. One is to put the engines in reverse and basically do SpaceX style, very slowly slowing down for 11 minutes, and then you eventually touch down on the runway. This isn't feasible for two reasons. One is because our craft is aerodynamic. As soon as we enter the atmosphere, we're going to be turned around by aerodynamic forces. And the other is the amount of fuel that we would need to do that would be absolutely insane. It would basically, you would have to unlaunch yourself. And that is just way, way too much to use. So the other way of doing it is to allow the quickly moving air particles slamming into the DeltaGlider to slow us down. And as you probably recall from my stock DeltaGlider reentry, that's exactly how we did it. So what you do is you're on the ISS, you're on this red orbit here, and then what we're going to do is somewhere along this red orbit, we're going to undock from the ISS. We're going to move a safe distance away from it so that we have no risk of colliding with it. And then at a predetermined point, we're going to fire the engines in reverse. And we're going to essentially uncircularize. We're not going to unlaunch ourselves. We're going to uncircularize. So what we're going to do is we're going to intentionally lower the perigee sufficiently into the atmosphere. And it's not a very defined boundary, right? It's a fading boundary. So it's not like, oh, you're in the atmosphere all of a sudden. It's not like that. It just gets steadily thicker and thicker and thicker. So after that happens, we're going to ride this this edge of the orbit down. We're going to get closer to the surface. We're going to prepare for reentry. And then we'll start getting into the atmosphere. Not much will happen. And then we'll reach a point called reentry interface. And reentry interface basically happens when the thickness of the air catches up with your current location. And that's when we're going to heat up. So normally what would happen is you would continue going down at this kind of slope. But what we're actually going to have to do is we're actually going to have to shallow the slope a little bit to about 70 to 90 meters per second. And basically what that's going to do is that's going to limit how quickly the air can thicken. And that gets into the next part of the tutorial, which I'm going to cover in a few minutes. Once you've sufficiently slowed down, then without any speed, you're simply allowed to fall into the atmosphere. And then there's this third stage. So I want to be very clear. There's a few key points right here that divide the reentry into three phases. You have the Keplerian phase, which starts from the uncircularization all the way down to the onset of reentry interface. Once reentry interface occurs, your temperatures start going up, and you have to then steer the craft, keeping it at a sufficient range to the target that you want to land at. You need to keep it sufficiently cool. You need to keep the G-forces low. And you need to ensure that the vertical speed is actually high enough that you don't bounce out of the atmosphere again. Because if this angle is too shallow, then what's going to happen is this. And that's bad, because after that happens, you're going to do this. And you could shallow the orbit, but then if you do it correctly, you're going to be here. We wanted Cape Canaveral to be here. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next part, which details exactly what the middle phase of flight looks like. Everything from the onset of reentry interface to the reentry dropout or fallout. Okay, so this is a zoomed in view of what you have. Basically, at the top you have space, in the middle you have the atmosphere, and at the bottom you have the ground. So here we come on this yellow trajectory here, and then all of a sudden we encounter the reentry interface. Let's make this a little bit steeper so I can demonstrate my point here. We're coming in pretty fast. So if you will, imagine that on the left side we're going to be going super fast, and on the right side we're going to be stopped. This is Cape Canaveral here, the square on the ground. So basically what happens is we're coming along, and you might say, okay, well, you know, Cape Canaveral's really far away. It would make sense that we have to shallow our angle, right? And fly like, whoops, wrong tool. And fly like this instead. And yes, that's how we would plan it, but the main reason we can't just do this is because we would just go meteor status and we would burn up. So as we start to get lower, very early on in reentry, you have a dangerous part of flight. This is very dangerous part of flight. This is the speed temperature curve. And basically what it means is if you fly any faster than a given speed at this altitude, you're going to cause a hull failure due to overtemperature. It's the exact same thing with the SR-71, the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter, and the Concorde. Is you're all concerned about what your hull temperature is. The difference between the airplanes and the DeltaGlider is instead of talking thousands of miles per hour and hundreds of degrees, we're talking tens of thousands of miles per hour and thousands of degrees. So you have to be really careful. So there's this reentry corridor, and what we're going to do is we're going to shallow the angle to stay above this danger zone. If we encounter the danger zone for any more than about 8 seconds, depending on exactly how far we stray into this region, we will encounter a catastrophic hull failure, and the ship will disintegrate, just like the Space Shuttle Columbia did, unfortunately. That's assuming that our hull is perfectly intact. And then you have another curve that you're worried about, and that's a vertical speed curve, which I'm going to mark off in orange. Basically what this is it says, given a certain speed, you have to be concerned about a vertical speed greater than this, because what will happen is that you're slowing down and you're relying on the ever-thickening air to keep you in the atmosphere. If you shallow your rate enough, what's going to happen is you're going to basically try and overcorrect. But the problem is you're at your perigee, which means the orbit's going to swing you back out again. And because you're over the critical line, you've now done a bounce. And what's going to happen is, if we went over here, basically we would try and fail, and we'd go up and out of the atmosphere. So that would be a bounce. Now there's a third region. If it couldn't get any more complicated, there is a third region. And that's the region that we're concerned of high G-forces. And generally that looks something like this. So generally early on, you're concerned about your temperatures. And then later on, you're concerned about your about the high G-forces that the craft could experience. So we're going to correct like this. And then there's a third phase here where we're basically steering the craft so that we get to, and in fact, let me do it this way. This point here is at 90,000 feet and 104 kilometers if you're at about 18,000 kilograms weight from Cape Canaveral. That is the point that you need to be at re-entry dropout. Basically, at that point, the craft is done re-entering. It's now very quickly settling down into the atmosphere, and your fall rate is increasing very quickly. So you want to aim to be at about 90,000 feet and 700 meters per second at this point, 104 kilometers out. At this point, the craft is no longer in what's called a controlled stall. You're now in a full stall, which basically means you're dropping like a rock, or you're gliding, which means you're dropping like a rock. So just know, once you hit that point, you're going down, unless you turn the engine on and fly around. But if you want to do like the space shuttle, that's what you need to do. So to sum up, very early on, you don't notice anything here. And then when you get lower, see, yeah, the paint bucket shows up better. And then when you get lower, you're now concerned about this temperature region. So you need to steer the craft to between 70 and 90 meters per second. That's what this magic vertical speed is. Vertical speed is everything early on. Depending on how you're looking against the range, and I'll do a future episode showing you how to figure out the range chart. Depending on how you're doing, you can steer higher or you can steer lower, granted that you stay underneath the bounce trajectory and you stay underneath the temperature, or you stay above the temperature curve. Again, this is a speed to altitude curve. So the higher you are, the lower the temperatures for the same given speed, but the higher absolute temperatures per unit of speed. Hopefully that didn't confuse you. Later on, the air thickens to the point where you don't have to worry about exceeding the temperatures of the craft, because the air is now sufficiently thick enough to start slowing you down even faster. So this is the point where you want to, again, steer between the bounce trajectory and steer below or above the G-force floor. And at some point, the G-forces will no longer become an issue because you're now sufficiently re-entered. You're flying a little bit more like an airplane in a controlled stall. And the final phase of flight is getting this point, this altitude, and this speed at this range. And you do that by varying the pitch on board. I'll explain it because we're going to do an automatic re-entry. All we need to do is set up the very beginning, this trajectory from here to here. We're going to have to know what's going to happen from here to here and here to here, because this only gets us halfway there. We need to figure out what this distance between here and here is before we can know, okay, we need this type of orbit here. So that's basically how it's done. The automatic autopilot will kick in right here, handle everything down to this point at 90,000 feet, and then we fly like an airplane to Cape Canaveral. Okay, so I think we are ready to get started now. Okay, so here we are. You'll notice in the upper right, I actually have the date set to current. This is a real-life example of what happens when you plug a state vector into orbiter with the current location of the ISS. So at that time, this is where the ISS actually is in real life. And you might say, okay, well, there's no difference. Well, sometimes they move the ISS up and down. In the 2010 version of Orbiter, they have a section where the ISS is captured at a lower altitude, about 350 kilometers. And right now, we're at about 400 kilometers. So, I mean, that makes quite a bit of a difference. Anyway, the first step in re-entering is to get your inclination right. So basically what we're doing is we're waiting for the Earth to rotate us into Cape Canaveral. So we're going to have to wait maybe 1 or 2 more orbits before we get an opportunity where the path crosses. So it's just a waiting game. I'm just going to let time pass until I see a line passing over Cape Canaveral. Okay, so I found an opportunity. It works, but it sucks. Normally in spaceflight, what you would want to do is you would want to wait until one of these lines more precisely crosses exactly where you're going to be to perform your re-entry. But what we'll do is we'll actually do a plane change burn. So we're going to undock once we go over Spain, and then I'll explain what happens from there. Okay, so we're going to undock. To undock the DeltaGlider IV, there is actually a checklist for undocking. So that is just to simply check that the airlock doors are closed, which they're not. I actually opened them. See if we can get astronaut point of view here. Now I'm going to close the outer door. Okay, that's showing closed. EPU and battery are off. Then we just want to make sure, notice that there's actually a docking pressure here on the fuel input valve. We could get fuel if we needed to, but in fact we're going to have to do a dump because we can't re-enter heavier than 19,000 kilograms. And that is it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do a display. We'll do it down here. Display, and we want to do vessel check state 6. And before undocking 4.
Configuration correct.
So now we know when we hit this button here, nothing bad is going to happen, right? Right.
Undocking confirmed.
Okay, we're now free of the space station.
Rotate translation.
What I am going to do though is do a little thrust away from here. That way there's no issues in terms of collision. By the way,
rotation.
If I do a rotation here, you'll see we are actually parked underneath of the space shuttle. Isn't that cool? Okay, so now the next thing we need to do is a plane change. And that can't occur until we cross the equator. So that's the next event. We're just simply waiting until we reach the equator. Okay, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to correct the difference in path with where we're actually trying to go. You notice the path actually takes us in possibly the worst possible condition. It looks like this next path is actually going to be better than this one here. So what we see here is that we're too far north. So we need to drive that path down further south. And in doing so, we'll actually lose some weight, which is pretty good. So what we need to do is we need to lower our inclination. We're at a descending node, which means to lower our inclination, we need to burn ascending. So, do you remember that program? Pro 200 specification 1, 2, 3. And at this point, if you press H, wow, that is extremely convenient. Almost as if I had planned it. We're going to need quite a bit of time here to do this. But that's relatively annoying. And that's also annoying. It only allows ecliptic. Oh well. We're going to have to figure out this on the fly. Basically, we want to wait until we're just a few seconds above that location, and then we'll fire the engines. Okay, that's probably good. So we are going to burn ascending now, executing the autopilot. And let's fire them up. That's what I was talking about. That was a little bit too close for comfort. Oh, come on. It's impossible to hit zero with this craft. It's kind of really annoying. Okay, well, that is sufficient. So we now have a path that directly intersects Cape Canaveral. And we need to blow off some more fuel. So I'm going to fuel dump, and we're going to go exactly one orbit, because we're not re-entering this orbit, we're re-entering the next. So we'll come back at this day-night boundary in an orbit after I've done my fuel. Okay, we are now on the 0 orbit for re-entry. So the next thing that we need to do is take a look at the orbit and start planning on our stop. So let's change that to equatorial ship. And there we go. So that's the orbit we are currently in. Basically an eccentricity of 0. So remember I said we have 3 phases. One of the phases is a constant, 2 are variables in terms of distance to fly. The last leg, which is from 90,000 feet to 0, is always 104 kilometers. So now we need to figure out what the next is going to be. So in here we need to put our semi-major axis. Expressed in altitude, which is about 403 kilometers. And then all it is just a matter of picking an eccentricity that produces a re-entry angle that we want. So there are 3 ways to figure out and solve your re-entry orbit. One of the ways is to use a card, which is what I'm providing you. it's basically if you're circular at 400 kilometers, this is one way that works. The other way to do it is to numerically solve it, which is how I'm actually producing this information for you. If you numerically solve it, then you'll be able to do it for pretty much any instance. The best case, though, would be to use the aerobrake MFD, which will give you a certain range, as well as maximum heating and other things. That's really advanced, and I like to do that when I'm actually flying and not for my tutorials. So I can explain a little bit more about what it's telling you first before I tell you about it, essentially. So I found an orbit that works. We're going to use a specific eccentricity. So the next thing to do is to figure out what the range is going to be. And it looks like we got 13,447 kilometers from the reentry retrofire to reentry interface. The reentry velocity is going to be 7,901 meters per second. That's orbital speed, by the way, not ground speed. When you re-enter, you're looking at ground speed for your movements. The next thing that we need is the re-entry angle, which is what I based all of this on. The re-entry angle is basically how intense your re-entry is. You can choose anything between 0.8 and 4 degrees with the DeltaGlider. Anything more than that, it'll give you an error. Anything less than that, it'll basically tell you, hey idiot, you're not going to re-enter. In this case, we're going to use a re-entry angle of negative 1.43 degrees. And that's the angle that the green line here is going to make with this gray one 100 kilometers above it. Okay, let's see if there's any other information that I need from this page. I don't think so. So now we're going to go to planning the second phase, which is the fall through the atmosphere. And basically what I need to do here is give this thing my flight path angle, which is 1.43, and then the ground speed interface velocity 7,901, and the vessel mass 18,136. Okay, I think I've got it now. Yes. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to go down my column here, find out what the range is. And we're looking at about 3,380 kilometers. That's more like it. Okay, so now we have the ranges of our descent. On the first stage, everything from the re-entry burn, or rather the re-entry orbit decircularization to re-entry interface is 13,447 kilometers. The re-entry phase is 3,380 kilometers, and the descent phase is 104 kilometers, for a grand total of 16,931 kilometers from the re-entry burn. And the re-entry burn is going to lower our semi-major axis to 65 83 kilometers. So just check everything else out here, make sure that it's working. Okay, we're good. So the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to go to the map. We're going to target spaceports, Cape Canaveral, and that's going to tell us when to burn. Now, don't be alarmed that we're so close, because we're actually going further away. The burn basically happens on the opposite side of here. So, basically, we need to wait until this distance here ticks down to 16.93 M before we can do anything. So, we'll go ahead and skip to there. Okay, turning retrograde from the burn. And it's going to take a few seconds to make this, so if we go at 17.00, that is good enough. So we're going to burn until the semi-major axis is 6583. Go. So I overburned a little bit, which is typical. Let's see if I can find it.
Translation.
Okay, so now we need to do an adjustment here. We're not at 180, we're at like 185 for our true anomaly here, which is going to adjust our range just a bit. And our range will become... It's like 12,896. That's only 800 kilometers, so we wouldn't be that concerned about that kind of difference. But if I wanted to, I could up adjust the eccentricity just a bit. But I'm not going to here. Okay, so now the checklist for reentry and deorbiting actually has me doing the reentry burn later. Let's see where it is. Yeah, there it is. Do deorbiting burn. That's because I did it a different way. I prefer guess and check, which is what we're doing. So let's go down the reentry and deorbiting checklist. The first step is to check that your nose cone is closed, and it's not because we just undocked. That will have to close. Okay, lovely, no confirmation. Okay, the next thing to do is to check that our airlock doors are closed, but the inner and outer doors are closed. Seat belt on. We're going to atmospheric auto because we're going
Rotation.
back in the atmosphere.
Atmospheric auto.
The O2 and N2 systems all on because this is the most critical phase of flight. Stow the radiator, and it looks like it's actually stowed. Yep, the radiator is stowed. So now what we're going to do is we're going to check our map. I said that I wanted an angle of negative 1.43 degrees, so if I do D2, we're showing 1.25, and that is going to adjust a little bit as we fly, because for whatever reason, I've noticed that the difference in my calculations versus the ship's computer calculations are the same, but the ship computer won't tell you the right number right off the go. I don't know why that is, but my method works, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so I'm happy with that. We've done our deorbiting burn. Next, we're going to close the retro door, and we're going to close the hover door. We never want that to be able to happen. Okay, so we're going to do a vessel check. So we do display, 6, and this is the most important thing that we will do. 5, before reentry check.
Configuration correct.
Okay, that's extremely important to do it. It's so important that it tells you to do it on the reentry program. Okay, so generally I do everything early on, and there's a few things that I'll do later that will occur when I do the reentry preparations. So right now we're at 385 kilometers. We're going to come back at 200 for the final checks. And while I'm off screen, I'm just going to put in the ILS information to Cape Canaveral's landing strips, because we're going to be landing during the dawn. Okay, we're at 200 kilometers now. Not much has changed. We're still in a low orbit that's just getting lower. So we can check our math and see where we're at. We're at about 7,600 kilometers range, which is showing, let's see here, showing we should be at about 200 kilometers now. And when we get lower, then we'll be entering the second phase of the re-entry flight. Okay, so time for the next couple things now. What we're going to do is we're going to test the indicator lights. I'm going to turn the secondary HUD onto this, which is a re-entry display. The important things here are the vessel mass, which is controlling everything. The things that are going to change here is the total G load on the craft, which needs to be kept low. The range is applicable to where the ground is going to intersect the spacecraft here. And then you have the glide slope, which is currently what our re-entry angle is. That's going to change, though, because that's what it is right now, not what it'll be at 100 kilometers. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to change the HUD to surface, which is just by pressing H. We do Alt-H, now we go red. And that will show up good against the atmosphere, and it will also tell me, hey, stuff is about to get real. We're down to 170 kilometers, so I'm going to initiate a turnaround of the craft now. So this is where we need to actually start facing the oncoming airstream to prepare for what comes ahead. And at 150 kilometers, we activate the autopilot. Remember, this is going to be an automatic re-entry, which means our job is essentially done at this point, all the way to the third phase. The autopilot will handle everything in the second phase, and Sir Isaac Newton handles everything remaining in the first phase. Which means all we really need to do is land the airplane from about 90,000 feet. And I see it looks like we're a little bit cross-tracked, so I might induce some bank. You can actually tell the autopilot to bank, and it will, if it can. Sometimes the temperatures get too hot and you can't bank. Okay, just in time. Right here at 152 kilometers. So I'm going to cancel the autopilot, and we're going to do Pro 105 Spec 40. Automatic re-entry with a targeted angle of attack preferred of 40 degrees. Pitch is held by the computer, and we get to bank. We're now below 150 kilometers, pressing E to execute.
Automatic re-entry autopilot engaged. Please check vessel state.
And that's extremely important. We need to check the vessel state. Display 6 for check vessel state damage, 5 for before re-entry check.
Configuration correct.
Okay, we're safe, which means we're now going to go to D3 to display our temperatures. And we're going to change the HUD onto surface. Re-entry interface will occur at 41 kilometers from now. Okay, so we're getting close now. By the time we start getting down to 80 kilometers, that's where things are going to start getting hot. You'll start hearing things around 90. If you look down here at the surface MFD, right here in the lower right-hand side, you'll see the vertical acceleration. That's important. You'll also see the vertical speed. That's important. That needs to be maintained between 70 and 90. The autopilot's going to do it for us. Autopilot is important, and then below, or altitude is important rather, and below that is the angle of attack, which right now the computer's maintaining 35 degrees. What it's doing is it's causing a lift vector, right, to decrease our vertical speed, and this is the raw acceleration. Pretty soon we'll start seeing a G value tick up here, and that's how you know you're at the air. Okay, we're now below 1,000, or rather 100 kilometers, rather 100,000 meters. And the way re-entry is done is, believe it or not, you have to unlearn what you have learned. It's like to turn right, you have to set your wheel left, that sort of thing. If you are angled shallow, that causes you to have more lift, which means your vertical speed decreases, and so do your temperatures. If you increase your pitch, then you decrease the amount of lift, which means you fall faster into the atmosphere and increase your temperatures. So right now, the autopilot's just pitched us down to 20 degrees angle of attack. We're in a controlled stall right now. It is stabilizing us so that we bring the vertical speed down before something bad happens. Okay, here's your G value ticking up. We've had re-entry interface. Current range 3,600 kilometers. And let's see, desired speed. I'm going to turn this to orbital velocity so I can see it. Desired speed at this point is going to be 7898 at 3,380 for range. So there's 3480. Okay. And there's 3,380, and we're at 7905. We're 7 meters per second off. I'm looking at my second chart now. I can't do anything because the autopilot really has control. All I can do is tell it to do is bank. So right now it's increasing its pitch. If you look at the vertical speed, it's now coming down, and so is the vertical acceleration, which means we're getting closer to holding a vertical speed. I can hear the atmosphere now. We should start getting some high temperatures very soon. I'm also going to tell the autopilot to induce a 5-degree bank so we can steer closer to Cape Canaveral. Okay, as you see, the autopilot is slowly increasing the values because we're now in the 70 to 90 meter per second range. The autopilot will subject us to a maximum G of 1.5 Gs. So it will maintain the temperatures to within their limits and to where you get 1.5 Gs of maximum acceleration. Temperatures maintained within 2,200 degrees at the tip, and in this case, 1.5 Gs decel. So, when you talk about re-entry, the 7s don't really do anything. That's just kind of you're bleeding off a little bit of early speed. That's sort of like the preheat cycle. The 6s and 5s are the scary speeds. That's where your ship is like 1,700 degrees Celsius and you're concerned about it getting too hot. 4s and 3s are the G-forces. You're concerned about generally G-forces. And 2s and 1s are your range. You're concerned with getting precisely where you want to land. Let's see, we're heading this way. There is sunset, by the way. Alright, let's see how we're doing on speed. We're at 2118. And we're expecting 7892. Yeah, we're going a little bit faster now. So if you notice right now, the autopilot thinks that 42 degrees is an adequate angle to maintain about 87 meters per second for vertical speed. And that's what it assumes will be safe when we re-enter. We're starting to get hot. By the way, you see that red AP? You need to stay away from that because if you touch it, there's an extreme risk that you will bounce out of the atmosphere. Okay, we now have plasma and you can see we're now starting to glow incandescently. This is full re-entry. $1,100°C, we're halfway to our maximum. Okay, so the autopilot thinks now that we're getting a little bit too hot, so it's decreasing the vertical speed by manipulating the vertical acceleration by lowering the angle of attack. We're going to 70 now to limit the maximum temperatures that we're going to encounter. By the way, here's 6,000. Like I said, you know, we're at about 1,400 centigrade now. We're at 65% or so maximum heating. $1,530. That looks like we're over Cancun right now. Actually, that's going to be Cancun. Okay, so the atmospheric mode has just turned on. We're now thick enough that we can use the air flight control surfaces. Okay, this is peak heating now, so I'm going to begin initiating a 10-degree bank. Misread this readout, by the way. So it looks like that max G just records the highest G-force that you encounter. We're actually past the scary temperature phase. Now we're in the scary deceleration phase. We're at about 2 Gs right now, still going up. Now the autopilot has decided that we are doing okay for temperature and has decided to pitch up and increase our vertical speed. We're now low enough that even at 100 meters per second of vertical speed, we're not going to overheat. In real life, I shouldn't say in real life, if I had manual control of the craft, I would tell it to lower the vertical speed at this point because we're coming up short on the range. That's why I like doing manual re-entry, because I can actually control the re-entry to where I want it, whereas the autopilot has no idea that I want to land at Cape Canaveral. So it's just going to do its normal profile, where I could tell it to drag out if I wanted to. And this is, like I said, we're now down to the end. This is where I'm concerned about my range. So if I had manual control of the autopilot, I would be lowering the pitch right now and the vertical speed to about 50 meters per second so that I can sail further through the atmosphere. When we reach about 700 meters per second, the autopilot will have pitched us down to our flight vector, lowering the angle of attack to 0, connecting us with the airstream so that we can fly like an airplane. That's the automatic air intake opening. By the way, there's no more plasma. We're done with that. And we can fly like an airplane. At that point, I'm going to turn my engines on because we're actually distant enough that we're going to have to go pretty far. We're getting close now, by the way. Generally, that happens about 90,000 feet. We're about 700. We should be about 104 kilometers away. As you can see, we're about 400. So, you know, that could have been done a little bit better. But that's why I like manual mode, because I could have seen that early on and realized, hey, we need to go further. Okay, here we come. Any second now, the autopilot will start pitching us down. I'm going to tell it to reset your bank. Okay, here we come. 90,000 feet and 700 meters per second. We have a range of 104 kilometers. The program is disabled itself. Okay, that's it. We now have full control of the craft. I'm now activating the engines and I'm trimming up. We're going to make a turn up to Cape Canaveral. Altitude 80,000 feet. now, if we were the space shuttle, we would kind of be SOL, but we would plan this a lot longer than I did. Like, I literally put the equations together for this in like 30 seconds. Whereas we would spend time making sure that the orbit was exactly where it was. I would have done numerical integration to figure out exactly what our true anomaly would have been. So now if we go to our programs here, if I go to atmospheric flight, Alt-5.
Atmospheric autopilot engaged.
There we go. We're now flying autopilot. And we're going to continue flying like this to Cape Canaveral. So generally, we use the 1-to-1 rule for flying down to the Cape. So that means we're at an altitude of 23 kilometers. So we have about 300 kilometers to go in our current configuration. Which means we're going to have about a 6-minute flight. That's it. We can come down here, check our vitals, make sure everything still looks good. Yeah, we got full oxygen. We got a healthy supply of fuel that should last a while. Not using very much fuel. If we had equipped with scramjets, we would use those, but we don't have scramjets. So that's pretty much it. We're now going to wait until we get to Cape Canaveral. So the next episode will be on manual reentry. And I mentioned it before, but why is manual reentry such a big accomplishment to be able to do? One reason is because you can make course adjustments based on your range instead of using a predefined reentry profile that you have to stick to. Another reason is because the automatic reentry does not work for any of the other planets or moons of the solar system. So if you master manual reentry and you master planning manual reentry, then you'll be able to reenter on any planet or moon that you choose. Unfortunately, though, it is a lot harder and it's a lot more involved. And speaking of rejections, the automatic reentry autopilot will reject your request to run if you're not using the Earth, or if the reentry speed is predicted to be over 8 kilometers per second, or the reentry angle is steeper than 4 degrees. If any of those are true, the automatic reentry autopilot will not run. It will refuse to turn on.
Atmospheric auto.
Okay, so you just saw how a lifting body reentry works in real life. I complain all the time about how the stock DeltaGlider doesn't do it justice like it's done in real life. What you just saw on the DeltaGlider 4 is real life. That's how it's done. That's how they did it with the space shuttle. So at this point, we're now going to glide down to land at the runway underneath of us. So I'm going to just turn downwind here. And this is pretty much landing phase from here on out. So basically what I'm going to do is turn downwind, turn base, turn final, and then I'll show you a little bit like what a nighttime landing looks like. I don't think I've shown a nighttime landing yet. It's nice and simple. Okay, I'm turning from base to final now. You can see the runway far off in the distance. It's not the near one that's just below. So it's pretty much almost exactly the same as landing for an aviation runway. Okay, going back to the checklist, when approaching the runway, turn the gear hydraulic pressure on. And when we get even closer, we'll put the gear down. Just like before, you place the prograde velocity vector on the start of the runway. And initially, that's what you focus on. Okay, we're now down to about 180 meters per second. We're getting closer.
Gear down.
Gear's going down. We're going to look for 3 lock lights here. And we got them. Okay, we're at landing speed now, which is about 160. Just to confirm, we're under 19. Yeah, we're way under 19. We're fine there. Okay, when the threshold goes out of sight beneath you, then you cut the engines and you focus on the far side of the runway. Okay, there it goes. We have touchdown. Okay, well, I'd call that a B+. Not a particularly good landing for me, but not a bad one either. Okay, so that is how automatic reentry works. Next episode, we'll go for the manual reentry, where you'll learn a little bit more about how reentry works and how to control the craft both on Earth and on other planets. So this has been Dr. Aeronautics, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.